From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. I'm Jeff Wichman. African swine fever has been confirmed in the Dominican Republic. The disease has not entered the U.S., and Jorden Gebhardt, an assistant professor in the K-State Department of Diagnostic Medicine and Pathobiology, says that's because the U.S. has a number of safeguards in place. K-State beef specialist Jaymelynn Farney discusses her research on using essential oils and spices for cattle and its effects on gains and usefulness as fly and tick control. So far, she's seeing mixed results on controlling flies and ticks, but positive results on weight gains. And K-State horticulturist Ward Upham outlines the steps for dividing iris, something he says can be done now. It's all just ahead on Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network. This is Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network. African swine fever has been confirmed in the Dominican Republic, and the U.S. says it is committed to assisting the country in dealing with ASF. Jorden Gebhardt, an assistant professor in the K-State Department of Diagnostic Medicine and Pathobiology, says that the U.S. has a number of safeguards already in place to prevent the disease from entering the U.S. Jorden, the big news out of the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Foreign Animal Disease Diagnostic Laboratory was the fact that AFS has been found in the Dominican Republic.
Yes, African swine fever virus, or commonly known as ASF, is a viral disease that affects swine, both domestic swine that we think of in a typical visiting the county fair or any sort of commercial production here in the U.S. or elsewhere throughout the globe, but it also affects wild swine as well. So feral pigs here in the U.S. and in certain parts of the globe. This virus is a highly contagious and very lethal virus that affects swine, both domesticated and wild varieties. And really, I think it's important for the audience to know right off the bat is that this is a disease and it's a virus that affects only those swine. So it does not affect humans in any way. It is not a human health risk, nor is it a food safety issue. So it's a critically important virus in regards to swine health and preventing the spread of this very, very devastating disease. But it is important for the public to know that it does not pose any direct health implications for the human population. And one of the reasons the U.S. keeps such a close watch on this is the fact that it can be devastating to the pork industry. Absolutely. So ASF is a virus that's been around globally for several decades. Really some areas that we think of as being endemic or really struggling with this virus over wide and long durations of time and over decades include parts of sub-Saharan Africa and Eastern Europe who have dealt with this disease for decades. More recently, in 2018, it was introduced into parts of Asia, and within the couple of years since then has widely spread throughout many areas of Asia. China, the Philippines, Vietnam, and other countries in that region have been devastated by this very impactful virus. And not only does it cause, in some scenarios, in some cases, very high levels of pig mortality, but also it extends well beyond the pork industry in itself. Not only if a region or a country is affected with this virus, does that impact their ability to export pork products to other parts of the globe, it also has widespread implications on other agricultural commodity markets. Here in the U.S., a standard pig diet consists of largely corn and soybean meal. So if we have a huge impact on the number and the population of pigs here within the U.S., that certainly would have widespread implications, not only from the ability for us to export pork products out of the U.S. elsewhere, but also on the corn, soybean meal, and other industries as well throughout agriculture and beyond within the economy. So in fact, the Dominican Republic right now is being boycotted, right? Yeah, absolutely. And it's important also for the audience to know that as of today and even prior to the announcement of diagnosis of ASF within the Dominican Republic, no pork or pork products were brought from the Dominican Republic into the U.S. And this was in response and in preparation for another viral disease called classical swine fever that the U.S. and USDA has been watching in the Caribbean and other parts of the world as well for periods of time. But even prior to this announcement, it's important to know that we were not we're not supposed to be bringing pork products in from the Dominican Republic into the U.S. But certainly if a new geography, a new country is first diagnosed with ASF or any other highly impactful foreign animal disease, it certainly has widespread implications as far as trade partners and the ability to trade and to distribute pork products and other commodities across geographic regions.
You mentioned this has been an ongoing issue for a number of years. Are we making progress with research?
Yes, Kansas State, and I'm very proud that our research program here at K-State, there are tremendous researchers over in the College of Veterinary Medicine, at the Biosecurity Research Institute, as well as the National Bio and Agro Defense Facility that's under construction and validation currently, and with goals of being fully operational within the next few years. There is quite a bit and quite an extensive research program here at K-State that is focused on understanding this devastating virus further, as well as developing strategies to control the dissemination and spread of this virus, as well as control methods in regards to vaccine strategies. Folks have been working, and researchers have been working on ASF vaccines for decades, and really it's been a very difficult nut to crack in a sense that we have made some progress, but it's due to really some unknown factors. It's been very, very challenging to develop a safe and efficacious vaccine for ASF. So as of today, there's no licensed, commercially available vaccine for ASF. There are several in various stages of development, but our best approach to control this devastating disease today is excluding that from our swine populations through biosecurity practices. And in the event that a region does become infected with ASF, one of the primary control strategies is to depopulate those affected swine, because we don't have any good alternatives to control the spread of this virus.
So we're looking then for symptoms that may show up in the herd?
Absolutely. So there are some really important symptoms that producers need to keep an eye out for. And several of these symptoms are not specific or not pathognomonic for ASF alone, and a number of other diseases can cause similar symptoms. However, if you do see these symptoms, it's very important to get in contact with your veterinarian. Under their guidance, they can recommend a further course of action as to what the best approach would be moving forward. And what some of these very, very important clinical signs can be include high fever, reduced appetite, and reduced activity or weakness of those pigs. One of the very things that we need to keep an eye out for is red, blotchy skin or specific skin lesions. The way this virus affects pigs, it affects the blood vessels. So one of the classic signs that people can often see are that red blotchiness of skin on those pigs, as well as diarrhea, vomiting, or coughing and difficulty breathing. So if a producer sees any of those clinical signs, very important to very quickly get a hold of your veterinarian, discuss what you see further with them. And today, and with the modern technology we have, and everybody has a camera on their smartphone, and it's very, very easy nowadays to be able to communicate quickly with a veterinarian, show them what you're seeing, and then based on their professional experience and expertise, they can determine the best course of action moving forward.
I know there's not a vaccine for this, but is making sure that their health is good from the get-go, does that help?
Absolutely. And given that some of those clinical signs can be seen with some other diseases as well, making sure we have healthy pigs from the start really allows us to, one, not only maximize the productivity of, as producers, have healthy, efficient pigs for our goal, whether that be commercial production or whether it be small-scale backyard production. Having healthy pigs from the start is really one of the keys to long-term success. And ASF is no different than that. Extremely important that we keep this very devastating disease out of the U.S., but also in a broader sense, keeping a lot of these endemic diseases that producers struggle with, trying to eliminate those from our swine herds and keeping pigs as healthy as possible is very important for long-term success and productivity.
We've been successful so far in keeping the disease out of the U.S. How have we been doing that, and is there more that we can do?
Absolutely. So diseases, foreign animal diseases, in a simple sense, are diseases that we don't struggle or we don't currently have here within the United States. And ASF would fall into that category, circulating in other areas, but not currently known to be here in the U.S. In any sort of wild or domesticated population. And really one of the unique things about ASF is the ability for this virus to survive in various meat products for extended periods of time. that's somewhat unique to this virus as opposed to some other bacteria or other viruses that affect swine or other species. And again, the presence of that virus in the meat causes and poses absolutely no human health risk or no negative implications whatsoever. So the consumer can feel very safe that the product produces is wholesome and healthy. But the challenge with that is that the large number of people traveling internationally and traveling back to the U.S. from abroad destinations, if they bring any products back into the U.S., say any meat products or any other food products like that may have been exposed to ASF or be contaminated with African swine fever virus, bringing that here into the U.S., if that ends up in front and exposed to either a wild pig or a domestic pig through garbage feeding or any other type of route where that food product could come into contact with a susceptible pig, that would be a way in which this virus could be introduced into the U.S. Feed products themselves, soybean imports, soy product imports, or amino acids and some other things that coming into the U.S., there's been a lot of research and thought into understanding further the risk of bringing along viruses with those here into the U.S. But really with ASF, one of the big risks that we commonly think of include human movement. If a traveler was on a pig farm and those animals were infected in another country, and if there's any fecal material, bodily fluids, or any other contaminated material on their clothing or shoes, if they don't properly clean and sanitize that material when coming back into the U.S., and then if they go into contact with a susceptible pig, that would be one mechanism by which the virus could enter the U.S. So really some of the big areas that the regulatory oversight is focused on is the Customs and Border Protection agents. And their job is to protect the interests of the U.S. in a very, very broad sense. And one of those is making sure that pathogens do not enter the U.S., which can affect our food supply, both plants as well as animals, and make sure that it does not end up in front of pigs and cause a potential risk for disease introduction.
That's Jorden Gebhardt, an assistant professor in the K-State Department of Diagnostic Medicine and Pathobiology, with an update on U.S. efforts to prevent ASF from entering the country. Agriculture Today is back in a moment. This is the K-State Radio Network. This is Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network. I'm Jeff Wichman. K-State beef specialist Jaymelynn Farney has been conducting research on using essential oils and spices for cattle and its effects on gains and usefulness as fly and tick control. She discussed her findings at this week's Southeast Area Beef Cattle and Forage Field Day in Parsons and during a Dr. J's Beef podcast late last year. So far, she's seeing some mixed results on controlling flies and ticks, but positive results on weight gains.
I have access to about a one-section piece of property at Yates Center. It's called the Bresner Research Unit. That's broken into 8 different pastures. We can run 281 stocker calves on a 90-day double-stocked grazing program. That first year in 2018, I fed a product called Think Fly. So we weighed the cattle going out onto grass and coming off of grass. And every week for the 12 weeks that they were out on grass, we went out and took pictures of them, 33% of the calves in each pasture, went back and counted the number of flies on the animals by hand. It is quite the intensive little project. In regards to what we kind of found with that Think Fly product, similar to some of the feedlot studies that were found, our cattle out on this tallgrass native range that had been burned in the spring, they gained 1/4 pound more average daily gain, the ones that were on that Think Fly or the essential oil spice mineral, versus those that were just on a good free choice stocker mineral. And over that 90 days of grazing, that resulted in 24 pounds more total calf weight. Actually, over that 90-day period, those calves that were still on that spice product, even being very expensive, resulted in about a $10 more return on your investment per head by feeding that spice product. What about the fly component? Overall, feeding the spice did not result in less number of flies on our animals. However, when we looked at it every single week, by weeks 8, 9, and 11 of the study, the cattle that were on the spice mineral had less number of flies on them than those on the control. Even though I said there were 3 different weeks where the cattle on the spice had less flies than the ones on the control, does not necessarily equate to, we had improved gains because there were less flies on the spice cattle. We found that there was 1 extra week where the cattle were on the spice mineral that they had less than the 200 flies per side. So that may have contributed to a small degree for that improvement in gain. However, I'm really starting to think that maybe that improvement in gain was more like what they see in the feedlot studies, where we actually are altering our rumen microbial population. I repeated this study in 2019. However, we also added into it some burn regimen. We have found that in our tall grass native prairie, that if you burn your pasture in its entirety in April, you get 20 pounds more gain over a 90-day grazing period than if you burn your pastures in March. As part of maybe a smoke management plan, if you could burn in March and still get that extra 20 pounds, we should be able to reduce our smoke amount by burning in March. So we wanted to look at that, and we set up a study at that same 8 pastures. We had 2 pastures where they were burned in March and the cattle received our control mineral. We had 2 pastures that were burned in March where they received a spice mineral. 2 pastures that were burned in April with the control mineral, and 2 pastures that were burned in April that received the spice mineral. Now, I didn't give you the exact cost of that Thankfly product in this podcast, but it gave you sticker shock when you saw the difference in the price value. So I utilized a lower cost feed ingredient, added about $300 a ton. That was a garlic oil in powdered form, as well as a product called Usefulness. It's a proprietary blend of some spices, but we fed that as a free choice mineral to our stocker calves out on these pastures. And once again, in 2019, we found that cattle on the spice mineral gained nearly 0.2 of a pound more average daily gain, resulted in about 20 pounds more gain off of the 90-day grazing period. Similar to what we've constantly been finding in our data out of Kansas, those on the April burned pastures gained nearly 0.4 of a pound more average daily gain and came off nearly 30 pounds heavier than those off of our March pastures. However, we really didn't see that feeding the spice to those calves in March, in that first year of the study, that we had the same gain as those that were on our April with our control mineral, which we were kind of hoping that the spice resulted in enough improvement in gains that we at least had that April control. We repeated that in 2020, and we will actually repeat this for another 2 years. And in 2020, we kind of saw a completely different story in regards to gain. Once again, the April burn with the spice mineral resulted in the highest average daily gain. However, our cattle on the control mineral in March had our second highest average daily gain, and those on the March spice mineral and our April control mineral had the same average daily gain. That was kind of interesting to us, because we're like, wait a minute, our March with our control is kind of our negative control, which we would anticipate being our lowest average daily gain. Why did we see that improvement or that higher gain? Well, when we went and looked at our fly counts, we had an extra week that those calves on the March control had lower number of flies below that 200 economic threshold value, which that might have just provided that little extra gain advantage to be able to see why it was opposite of what we thought it would. Now, over the 2 years when you'd averaged them, we did find that the March control has the lowest average daily gain. The April with the spice mineral has the highest average daily gain. And averaged over the 2 years, adding the spice into our March burn does equal the similar gain as if you would have just burned in April and had a traditional stalker mineral. So maybe with a few more years, we could, with some confidence, be able to say, okay, yes, you can spread out your time of burning by going into March and feeding this spice mineral and be able to see how that could still result in similar gains. Adding the spice in across both years, that improvement in gain observed, you net about $26 more per calf with the spice mineral as compared to the control, regardless of whether you burned in March or April. So I'm thinking so far that there is a gain advantage to be observed with the spices. However, its efficaciousness as a fly deterrent, I'm still not completely sold on, especially when you threw in another study where I had heifers on some brome grass pastures, and I fed them this same spice as what was on my tall grass native pastures. However, we force fed it through them, or hand fed it. We offered it to the cattle every single day, mixed in with distiller's grains. So we had a very consistent intake of the spices as compared to our free choice. Over the 200 days that we fed it, the cattle on the spice, or the heifers on the spice, gained about 15 hundredths of a pound average daily gain improvement compared to those on the control mineral. When we looked at flies, it had no impact on flies. But when we look at ticks, and we actually gathered these cows up, or these heifers up, every week for 12 weeks and would pull the ticks off of them and count them. For the first 4 weeks that the cattle were on the spice mineral, they actually had more total numbers of ticks on them than on the control. But from weeks 5 to 12, they had significantly less number of ticks on them than on the control. And actually, they had no ticks on them nearly a month earlier than those on the control mineral. And of course, it was only 1 year data, and our tick numbers were not drastically very high. But when we pulled the ticks off the cattle, we looked at whether they were engorged or not, meaning they'd been attached for a while to the animal. And we found that there were twice as many engorged ticks on the control cattle as there was on the spice. So that made me really wonder, maybe we didn't just keep the ticks from landing on the cattle, but they might have taken one bite and hopped off, didn't stay attached for a long period of time. Still think we need to do quite a bit more research in regards to this, but it looks like feeding the spices, or at least these combination of spices that I'd investigated, resulted in improvements in average daily gain. I'm still on the fence about whether it actually works as a fly control option, and definitely need more work from the tick perspective.
That's K-State beef specialist Jaymelynn Farney with information on using essential oils and spices for cattle gains and fly and tick control. You're listening to Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. I'm Jeff Wichman. In today's agricultural news, Midwestern crops are seeing a lack of meaningful rainfall. Stephanie Ho reports.
Many areas of the Midwest have not received much meaningful rainfall for 3 weeks in a row.
Now, as you move east of the Mississippi, that is not yet a tremendous concern because we had abundant soil moisture when the rains cut off about 3 weeks ago. So no huge concerns at this point yet. If we see rain returning later in August.
USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey says it's a different story west of the Mississippi.
We have suffered through a growing season-long shortage of moisture in places like Minnesota and the Dakotas. And so the fact that we have had little rainfall over the last 3 weeks is an even bigger concern. And that's reflected in crop conditions for corn and soybeans.
For the lower Midwest,
we do have some concerns that extend into Iowa, into Kansas, Nebraska, and even parts of Missouri. But the concerns in those 4 more southern states are less significant than the northern states where drought is more deeply entrenched.
This is Stephanie Ho for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
The seed laboratory manager for the Kansas Crop Improvement Association at K-State has an important message for wheat growers planning to plant saved-back wheat seed this fall. Eric Fabricius notes that Fusarium head blight disease was prevalent in this year's wheat crop and offers this caution to producers.
Infection varies within the population of seed from the point where it completely decimates that seed. We get what we call a tombstone kernel, which is shriveled and chalky, very light. In those types of seed, the embryo is actually dead. There's no recovery for that. Meanwhile, then you've got other seed that is also infected. And it looks normal, but it's just a lighter infection in the seed coat. In that case, that's where the embryo is alive. It's got potential to germinate, and it's a matter of outpacing the fungus when it starts to germinate. And like I say, so that fungus that's lighter in the seed coat will actually die out to some degree. So the heat that we're going through right now is actually sort of beneficial to speed that process up. But cleaning it is the biggest thing to get those tombstones out and remove those from that population, and that will be the first step of increasing your germination.
He says purchasing certified seed ensures that the seed has been tested for successful germination.
We're not doing seed health testing per se to determine if the fungus is present, but like I say, it becomes evident when you do the germination test. And then with certified seed production, you have a minimum requirement of 85% for your germination. And so any lots that we would get in that would fall below that 85 due to the Fusarium infection would be rejected, and they would have to either try and clean it again, get more of the worst kernels out, or they would be required to have to apply a fungicide to improve that to be better than the 85%.
Fabricius says getting seed professionally tested by the KCIA helps guarantee that all parts of the seedling are in a healthy state. USDA research facilities are taking a closer look at bacteria biofilms in meat processing plants and how they play a role both in creating or preventing pathogens associated with foodborne illness. Rod Bain has more.
Food safety is an essential mission within our nation's meat processing plants. Yet despite best efforts to sanitize facilities to prevent foodborne illness such as E. coli 0157H7 and Salmonella, some of these pathogens can survive in the right circumstances. Rong Wang, a researcher at USDA's Meat Animal Research Center in Nebraska, says the culprit is a bacteria biofilm.
When the bacteria has not a very convenient conditioning situation for them to grow, to quickly replicate, then the bacteria can sort of entering like a hibernating situation. They can slow down their growth, but they can attach to the contact surface, the hard surface, to form this very thin film that you cannot see by naked eyes.
Yet if the pathogens are detached in some way from this biofilm, they could find their way onto meat products, contaminating food and making consumers ill. Wang, however, says research is showing that there are multiple species of bacteria within a processing plant, differing from plant to plant, that even with the same sanitation procedures can create their own bacteria biofilm. Research is in its early stages, according to Wang. However,
we are trying to understand what kind of environmental background microspecies work against these pathogens, and we can use them for our benefit. It's kind of like an environmental friendly method. We can use it against the pathogen biofilm to reduce the contamination.
I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
And finally, in today's agricultural news, here's this week's soybean update.
Madeline Meyer is joining us. She will be a senior at Kansas State University. She's from Gossel. And Madeline, you served as one of the interns with Kansas Soybeans this summer.
Yeah, I did. It's been a really great summer. Hard to believe it's already over.
What were some of the duties that you had as an intern with Kansas Soybeans?
Duties kind of varied from day to day. One of our biggest projects was working on the annual congressional report. So we compiled a lot of the economic data about the different Kansas commodities, mostly about soybeans, but also including about like different row crops as well. We also got to work on a lot of social media content creation. And then we also got to travel to a few trade shows. and represent the commission and association there as well.
Why choose this internship with Kansas Soybeans? What got you interested in wanting to do this?
As an agricultural communications and global food systems leadership major, I've really been interested in sustainability and adaptability and versatility within agriculture. And as I was looking for different summer internships, I was also looking for an internship where I could expand on my skills that I've grown through K-State. And the Kansas Soybean Commission really kind of combined both of those two interests for me. And I was just really excited to be able to share what I had learned about the Soybean Association in Kansas and the industry as well.
Yeah, and I was just going to ask, what do you take out of that? Or if you know of any student who might be interested or you had a chance to talk to them, what would you tell them about the benefits of having this internship?
I mentioned earlier, I got to work on the annual congressional report. Once we were finished with that, we were able to meet with state legislatures and congressmen. And that wasn't something I would have been able to have the opportunity to do without this internship. I also was able to kind of pick and choose what I would do with different like social media creation and stuff like that. So it's really up to the interns what they want to do. And I just think that's really great. Just another way to develop skills that way.
What's in the future for you, Madeline?
So I'll be graduating from K-State in May, and I'm hoping to take a marketing or advertising route with that. Also working with digital media content creation for social media as well. So.
All right, sounds good. Well, Madeline, I appreciate you joining us. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
That is Madeline Meyer, who will be a senior at Kansas State University. She is from Gossel, majoring in Ag Communications and Global Food Systems Leadership, as she joins us on the Kansas Soybean Update. It's brought to you by the Kansas Soybean Commission.
And that's today's agricultural news. This is the K-State Radio Network. This is Agriculture Today. I'm Jeff Wichman. In this week's Lawn and Garden segment, K-State horticulturist Ward Upham explains why this is the optimum time for dividing iris. He covers the steps that go into dividing this perennial flower: digging, cutting, dividing, inspecting for damage, cutting leaves back, and planting. Ward, we are officially at that time when we're talking about dividing iris, so why now?
So this seems a little early for most of our perennials, but the reason with iris is that it's planted shallow, and you need give those roots enough time so they can get locked down into the soil so that during the winter when you get freezing and thawing, it doesn't lift those rhizomes right out of the ground. So things like daylilies and other perennials usually do in September, but this is the right time of year to do the iris.
And why do we divide them at all?
Yeah, some plants like peony, you may leave in place for years and years and years. Iris, if you do that, are going to lose vigor over time. And they're also going to kind of die out in the center of that clump. And so you want to divide those about every 3 to 5 years in order to make sure you kind of rejuvenate the plants. And they'll also flower better if they are in new soil like that.
So when you say they lose vigor, what does that mean?
It means that they have mined that soil for everything that they need. What we need to do is divide them, fertilize them, put them back in place, and they'll do a lot better.
So let's talk about the process then. What do we do when we divide?
Well, first thing, of course, is just to dig them up. And they're easy to dig. They're not like daylilies. And so they're easy to dig. And then you're going to divide those rhizomes into certain portions. Now, what you'd really like is what's called a double fan. And a double fan is where you have 2 sets of leaves that are connected to a larger rhizome. So you have 2 little rhizomes connected to larger rhizomes and 2 fans of leaves. That is vigorous enough, it's going to bloom probably that next year. Now, you're also going to have some that don't divide, where you're going to have a single rhizome with a fan of leaves. They're okay, it's just that it may take another year for them in order to come into actually producing flowers. And so when you dig them up, you're going to have to cut them and try to get double fans, but if you can't, go with single fans. And so that's what you're after. Double fans, you can get them. Single fans if you can.
And then we're looking at trying to avoid damaging those rhizomes.
Yeah, so usually it's not much of a problem digging them, as sometimes you just find rhizomes that have already been damaged. Insects, such as the iris borer, can get in there and really damage the rhizomes. You can also get some soft rot. It's kind of a bacterial disease that will cause that rhizome to kind of deteriorate. Therefore, if you see any of that, cut out any of the damaged place, and if there's enough left that you can still use it, go ahead and use it. Now, if it's soft rot, what you want to do is dip it in a 10% Clorox solution so that you can kill whatever bacteria is already there. Let it dry, and then you can go ahead and plant it. If you don't see any damage to them, you're fine. But some of the ones that do show some damage, you can replant. Others are too far gone. You're just going to have to discard them.
So some will have to be discarded, but there is a way to save some of them.
There is a way to save some of them as long as most of that rhizome is still there. Just have to cut out the bad part.
And then what about the leaves?
Leaves you want to cut back about 2/3 and also cut them at a bit of an angle so that water runs off, doesn't just sit on top of a flat surface. That will help prevent any damage from diseases that move in later.
And then when we get to the planting process, what are we doing there?
So what we're going to do is remove any weeds, and then you're going to fertilize. You fertilize before you mix the soil because you want that fertilizer mixed into the soil. You can either fertilize according to soil tests, is what we recommend, but if you don't have time to do soil tests, put on about a pound of a 10-10-10 per 100 square feet. A pound's going to be about a pint. So a pint of 10-10 per 100 square feet. Can't find that. 11-15-11 is really common. Anything that has numbers in that range are going to be fine to use. And then you apply that to the top of the soil, and then you mix it in at least 6 inches deep. That'll get that phosphorus and potassium so it's available to the plant. And then when you set these, set them so they're just a little bit, those rhizomes just a little bit below the soil line. You don't plant them deep. And as we mentioned earlier, since they're planted shallow, they need time in order to get those roots out. And so if you plant them that deep, even sometimes that rhizome over time will stick out of the ground. That's fine. It's not going to hurt anything. But as long as they're planted shallow, they'll go ahead and get established.
And the watering regimen?
Just make sure you water them in well, and then if we get into a dry period, continue to give them water. You want that soil moist but not waterlogged. And so that will allow those roots to get down and get established.
We're in the first week of August, so what are we seeing in the garden, and what might we be seeing in the garden?
Well, in the garden, we're probably seeing a lot of Japanese beetles if you're toward the eastern part of the state. They're moving west, and so if you haven't seen them yet, eventually you probably will. They're going to be present for about a month, and then they're going to go away. But once that population builds up, they can be a real problem. You may have to spray for them.
Right now, no need to spray?
It depends on how many there are. You know, at my place, this is the first year I've seen them. There's not enough that's worth spraying. But probably next year I'm going to have to, just because that population's going to build.
Are we getting any information as to how the crops have been this year in the home gardens? Tomatoes, are they doing well?
Yeah, tomatoes are usually doing well. The thing you have to watch with tomatoes is those leaf spot diseases that start at the bottom of the plant and work their way up. And so those are not wilt diseases. Sometimes people get concerned. But it's not wilt. It's septoria leaf spot and early blight are the two leaf spot diseases. You can use a product that is for garden fungus control. Usually it has chlorothalonil. Watch the waiting period on that, but usually it's a 0-day waiting period. So as long as you use something to control it and make sure you get at the underside of the leaves, the top side of the leaves, and catch it early, you can usually control it.
We had a lot of people that started gardens during the pandemic. Are you getting more questions than usual from people?
It was really last year. Last year was really the year where we got an awful lot of questions just because people were stuck at home. And so this year it's not quite as many, but it's funny because there's a lot of people that actually gained an interest in gardening because they had to last year.
And that's exciting for you, isn't it? Because with the Master Gardener programming and everything else that Extension does, nice to see people taking this on.
They are. Yeah, a lot of people have actually acquired a new habit.
And they can also get a lot of information from your newsletters. How do they get that information?
The easiest way is actually to do a search on horticulture newsletter, Kansas State University, and it'll pop right up.
And that's updated every week.
Yes, we do 50 weeks out of the year. We take off the week of Christmas and New Year's.
And they can still get that delivered right to their inbox?
Yes. So it comes, we send it out, really we say Tuesday, but often we send it out early on Monday.
That's K-State horticulturist Ward Upham with information on dividing iris. He says that iris should be divided now in order to root down before winter. That will help prevent being lifted out of the ground during freezing and thawing cycles. This reminder to listen to the podcast version of Agriculture Today, visit agtoday.net, agtoday.net, or using an app on your mobile device, type these search keywords, Agriculture, Today, Kansas, and you'll find this program. By tapping the subscribe button, brand new episodes of Agriculture Today will automatically arrive on your device. That's agtoday.net. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.